The NHL Winter Classic has become a staple of the league's outdoor game tradition. Attracting fans with its unique venues and matchups, it truly brings you back to the early days of the sport, or just when you were playing as a kid on local ponds and rinks. Well, today I have a detailed prediction for who I think should be playing in the next 10 Winter Classic games, along with some fan-selected ones and reasons why these selections were made. Now, with the 2025 Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues game happening today, let's go through some of these rivalries and talk about why I think these teams should be playing in the next 10 Winter Classics. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. The Winter Classic is today between the Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues. And as a new kind of fun video to make that takes away from the typical documentary stuff that I post here, I wanted to talk about 10 Winter Classic matchups that I would love to see happen in the upcoming years. I also asked you guys to submit a few matchups that you would like to see in the future as well, so it's a pretty good combination of all of that. So before we get into today's video, about 90% of the people watching have not subscribed to the channel yet. I have a sub goal of about 20,000 that I know we can reach soon. So if you guys want to continue supporting me and watch more hockey content like this, go ahead and hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And without further ado, let's predict the next 10 Winter Classic matchups. Let's start with the 2025 Winter Classic, and in fact, that's happening today, and it's between the Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues at Wrigley Field. So just this rivalry alone has been long-standing. It's intensified because they're both within the Central Division, and the history between these two teams makes this matchup very exciting. Now, Wrigley Field is the perfect venue for this Winter Classic. It has that iconic baseball feel, and it will draw a significant crowd despite the rivalry not really being as intense as it has been in the past. Now, I know not everyone is super excited about this because we've seen both of these teams compete in quite a few outdoor games, but personally, I'm excited to watch this one. I think it's going to be intense, and with Connorbedard playing in this one, as well as some of the young talent with the St. Louis Blues, I think that this should be a fun one. If I had to predict who I think is going to win, I would probably say St. Louis, just because I don't think Chicago has enough to really get it done here. But overall, I'm excited for this matchup, and I think that it was a good selection for 2025. Next up in 2026, this is a matchup that I personally would just love to see because I feel like it's one of the more underrated ones to watch throughout the regular season, and that's the Boston Bruins and the New York Rangers facing off either at MetLife Stadium, or you could go ahead and put them in some kind of baseball venue like Fenway Park again. No matter where the venue is, though, this is a historic rivalry that throughout the regular season just brings us some of the best games personally that I've ever watched. And I think if these two teams were to meet a little bit more, the rivalry would only get more intense. Now, like I said, again, both of these teams have had their fair share of outdoor games, but we're always going to see the original 6 teams mixed in there probably every other year, if not every year. So might as well give us a rivalry with two teams that are at the top of their game and have a lot of intense hate between each other. So for 2026, I would love to see the Boston Bruins face off against the Rangers. That is a kind of bucket list matchup that I would just personally be very excited for. Now, this is another original 6 matchup, but I do feel like we haven't seen one of these games as an outdoor event, which is honestly kind of shocking. And I think a big reason for this, and I could be wrong, but I'm going to put a little mark right here at the bottom of the screen if it's true, I don't believe we've seen a Winter Classic between two Canadian teams. And that's likely because the NHL wants to open up the market to both America and Canada, but for the most part, I feel like the Winter Classic matchups just contain two US-based fan bases. So for this event, I would just love to see a Canadian rivalry make it to the Winter Classic. I don't care where you do it, but honestly, I just think it'll be exciting either way. So for 2027, I have Toronto versus Montreal, or at least a fan would really like to see that based on your submissions. Now, 2028, this is another fan submitted one, and I was almost not going to include it on this list because there previously was an outdoor matchup between these two teams. And sort of based on the discrepancy between these two teams in the standing, I just don't know if it would be as intense as you would think, but this matchup would be between the LA Kings and the Anaheim Ducks. Now, again, we've seen them in an outdoor game before, but This game would be taking place in Venice Beach and would be an innovative twist on the Winter Classic format. I think it would appeal to people who are really more in that California region, or just kind of maybe bring in some new fans to the event that is the Winter Classic, rather than just rinsing and repeating with the same original 6 markets. And the rivalry between the Ducks and the Kings is really good, especially when you consider both teams rebranding, both up and coming really, and having some great young talent. Again, I can see why this one wouldn't appeal, but for people out in Southern California or just more out west in general, I think we need to start giving them a few more outdoor games, because it's not like their teams are bad or anything, and the rivalries are just as intense as some of the ones out east or in Canada. So 2028, we have the Los Angeles Kings versus the Anaheim Ducks in the Winter Classic. Now 2029, I think we haven't seen a really good battle of Pennsylvania in a while, and yes, the Pittsburgh Penguins have had a Winter Classic pretty recently with the Bruins, and Philadelphia has been involved in some, but this rivalry to me is one of the best ones that has existed since I've been a fan of the game. And while I do think Pittsburgh and Philly are not exactly in the best place right now, I do think they're kind of on the same playing field, and that the matchup would still be just as intense. Now, Sidney Crosby is a draw himself. Philadelphia has guys like Torts that are so entertaining to watch, and now Michkov coming up in their system. I just think that this would be a great in-division rivalry that would draw a lot of fans to it. I'm not saying that it's not something we haven't seen before, because of course it has happened with both of these teams multiple times, but when it comes to pure rivalries, I think that this would be a top one that we all would like to see in a future Winter Classic. So for 2029, I think that it should be the Pittsburgh Penguins and Philadelphia Flyers. Maybe Crosby will still be around at that point, hopefully, and it might be his final sort of outdoor game, so that would be a fun game to watch. Up next for 2030, I think it should be the New York Rangers versus the New Jersey Devils. And honestly, I wouldn't be mad if this one happened sooner. I feel like the rivalry between these two teams is just so intense right now. If you remember that game where they just broke out in a complete frenzy with the fights, the playoff series was super intense, and I just believe with some of the superstars on both of these rosters, it would draw a massive audience, especially with it being New York. Just that market alone brings enough fans to justify having this matchup. I know some people might not be into it because, again, we're seeing all of these original 6 teams constantly get Winter Classic games, but personally, I just feel like that's just the league trying to appeal to those audiences that have been present for such a long time, and it also allows you to bring in other teams like the Devils who have never had a Winter Classic game before. Yes, they've had outdoor games before, but never the biggest stage when it comes to kind of these outdoor games in general. So the New York Rangers versus the New Jersey Devils, in my opinion, would be a very good matchup, especially based on some of the recent games these two teams have had between each other. 2031, another fan-submitted one. We have a repeat of the Battle of Alberta between the Calgary Flames and Edmonton Oilers. Now, we saw the Heritage Classic series last year, and it was honestly so exciting to watch. The Oilers were in a spiral, the Calgary Flames weren't exactly in the best position, but still both teams brought their A game, and it just looked wonderful on the ice. Now, who knows where Calgary's going to be at that point, or what Edmonton's going to look like. Either way, I think that this rivalry will constantly hold some kind of stake between both teams, and I think that everybody would be interested in it. Again, we've never seen 2 Canadian teams compete in a Winter Classic before, but I think it's about time that we give some of these Canadian markets a chance to prove that they're able to carry an event like this, especially with how popular the Heritage Classic was last year. I just personally think that a battle between these two teams, say at Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium, would be an insane event to watch. So hopefully we can see these Canadian markets get an opportunity, and for the fans who submitted this, because there were a lot of them, I think that this is a matchup we all would like to see. Next up, this is another untraditional one, but I still think it has a massive draw. Another kind of matchup where I don't know where these organizations are going to be in, say, 5 to 6 years, but even if you wanted to do it sooner, I think it would still draw a pretty large crowd. And this one's between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. Now, when it comes to this matchup, it's definitely more of an untraditional one because hockey isn't the biggest down in Miami, South Beach, or just in Florida in general. But with both of these teams being so good and having so much star power, especially with Florida and Tampa both recently winning a Stanley Cup, I think there would be a huge draw here. We saw the intense playoff matchup last year where both teams just genuinely are filled with hate for one another, and I think putting them outdoors with guys like Tkachuk and Kucherov, the star power that exists between these two teams, I think it would be wildly entertaining, and I think it would open up the Winter Classic to a new market, kind of giving us something different than what we're used to seeing with some of the other matchups. So for 2032, I have Tampa Bay Lightning versus Florida Panthers, maybe at Hard Rock Stadium. I think that would just be an insane matchup between those two teams. Next up, another fan submitted one. This one's for 2033 though. It's between the Chicago Blackhawks and San Jose Sharks. Now at first I was like, well, this is a little bit of a weird one. There's not a real rivalry that exists between these two teams. But then I thought about it a little bit more. You have Macklin Celebrini, Connorbedard, two of the up-and-coming faces in the NHL, both first overall picks, and by the time it reaches 2033, they will both either be in their primes or just entering their primes, which could make this matchup a lot more exciting if you think about it. Now, I'm not saying that we can kind of make this prediction or that these two players or teams will even be good at that point, but if the Sharks and the Blackhawks both can build around Connor Bedard and Macklin Celebrini, and we're seeing these two teams repeatedly face off in the playoffs, then an outdoor game between two different markets would be fantastic. It could even be held near California or in San Jose, for example, something that we haven't seen yet. So I think this would be a great matchup, especially if both of these players live up to the hype and the potential that we know they all are capable of. So 2033, let's mark it down as the Blackhawks versus the Sharks. I think that this was a great concept and a really cool idea for the future of the Winter Classic. And last but not least, 2034. This is a matchup that you could even push a little bit earlier based on how well Ottawa has been playing lately. And that's between the Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators. The Battle of Ontario, a matchup that I'm shocked we haven't seen outdoors yet, but I think it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about Canadian markets not really getting the full Winter Classic stage, with no two Canadian teams facing off in a Winter Classic yet. But if you want to draw a crowd, Toronto is the biggest market in the NHL, and Ottawa being an up-and-coming team that has a ton of young superstars, especially with guys like Brady Tkachuk, I just think that rivalry would be fantastic for the league and draw a huge crowd. Personally, I think it's one of my top ones that I would like to see. It's either Toronto and Montreal or Toronto and Ottawa, and depending on where you think these two teams would be, I think you could bump it up to be a little bit earlier because you don't want to just be having a Winter Classic. If Austin Matthews is in his mid-30s, maybe you want to draw that crowd a little bit sooner. So I think we definitely need to see more Canadian markets facing off in the Winter Classic. And what better way to do that than between the Battle of Ontario with the Ottawa Senators and Toronto Maple Leafs? We need that in the Winter Classic very soon. But yeah, these are my predictions for the next 10 Winter Classics. Not really a scripted video, just me really talking hockey and just kind of wanting to talk about the matchups I would like to see in the Winter Classic over the next 10 years or so. Now you guys can move these around. I know some of them, maybe the Pittsburgh one, Sidney Crosby might not even be playing at that point, so you could bump that one up sooner if you wanted to. Or like I said, the Ottawa versus Toronto one, it might be a little bit more appealing in the next 2 to 3 years rather than over the next 10 years. But just drop your thoughts in the comments below. What matchup would you like to see for the Winter Classic in the upcoming years? And who do you have winning in the 2025 Winter Classic matchup between the Chicago Blackhawks and the St. Louis Blues? Make sure you guys give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. Thank you guys as always for watching. I'll see you in the next one.